5 minutes later. So welcome everybody. Today, again, another academic Thursdays with us. Today, the topic is something from our ongoing courses. One of the courses that we are doing at the AI and Informatics faculty. This course, AIE 304, Learning in Humans, given by one of our faculty members, Dr. Behna. Today we will show you a new feature actually with Professor Dux that is able to give the lecture directly face to face without any assistance from the instructor of the course. That's what we try to arrange for you today. Engineer Nafisa will help us to show you how this is implemented in the Dux platform. You will see how with one click or one button, you will be able to start the lesson. That should be able to give you the lecture, including the slides, the material, and then you will open the session for your questions as well. So feel free to program as if you do instructor in the classroom. Face to face, in language, you can ask them after the presentation or the lecture that you will give, whatever question you have, about the material for the classes. So we are ready to start? That's the floor is yours.
Welcome to the class. Let's get started. Today we begin with cognitive psychology, a major approach for understanding how humans learn. Cognitive psychology is the scientific study of mental processes. These processes include attention, perception, thinking, memory, language, problem solving, and decision making. Instead of looking only at observable behavior, cognitive psychology asks what happens inside the mind when a person encounters information and responds to it. In this view, learners are not passive receivers. They actively select information, interpret it, connect it to prior knowledge, and store it for future use. This is why cognitive psychology is so important in education and in the study of human learning. It helps us understand why some information is remembered and some is forgotten, why attention matters, and why meaningful learning is more effective than simple repetition alone. In this lecture, we will focus on one central idea. The mind can be understood as an information processing system. We will then examine three major memory components within that model: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. A central idea in cognitive psychology is that the mind works as an information processing system. This does not mean the human mind is exactly like a computer, but the comparison is useful. Information enters the system from the environment, is processed in different ways, may be stored, and can later be retrieved to guide behavior. In simple terms, we can describe this as input, processing, storage, and output. Input begins when sensory organs detect sights, sounds, and other stimuli. Processing involves selecting what to attend to, interpreting it, and connecting it with existing knowledge. Storage refers to keeping information over time, either briefly or for long periods. Output is the response, such as speaking, solving a problem, making a decision, or performing an action. This model helps us understand that learning is not automatic. Just because information reaches the senses does not mean it will be remembered. Some information is ignored, some is briefly held, and some is encoded deeply enough to become part of long-term memory. The quality of attention and the way information is encoded strongly influence learning outcomes. The information processing model describes memory as a system with three major components: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. These components are often presented as stages because information typically moves through them in sequence. First, sensory memory briefly holds raw information from the environment. Second, short-term memory, or STM, holds information that is currently being attended to and actively processed. Third, long-term memory, or LTM, stores information for extended periods, sometimes for years or even a lifetime. The movement of information from one stage to another depends on important cognitive processes. Attention is the process that selects some sensory input for further processing. Without attention, most incoming information disappears very quickly. Once information reaches short-term memory, rehearsal and meaningful encoding increase the chance that it will be stored in long-term memory. Retrieval then allows stored information to return to conscious use when needed. This model is useful because it shows that memory is not a single container. It is a dynamic system with different functions at different points. Let us begin with sensory memory, the first stage in the information processing model. Sensory memory is a very brief storage system that holds raw information from the senses. When you see a word on a screen, hear a sound, or feel a touch, that information remains available for a very short moment, even after the stimulus is gone. This brief trace allows the cognitive system to decide whether the information is important enough to process further. Sensory memory includes different forms, such as visual sensory memory for images and auditory sensory memory for sounds. However, the key point is that the duration is extremely short. If attention is not directed toward the stimulus, the information fades almost immediately. This means that the environment provides far more information than the mind can fully process at one time. Sensory memory acts like a temporary holding area, not a place for understanding or long-term storage. Its function is to preserve incoming information just long enough for attention to operate. In learning situations, this has an important implication. Students may be exposed to many stimuli, but only a small portion will move forward for deeper processing. Attention is one of the most important processes in cognitive psychology because it determines what information moves beyond sensory memory. At any moment, the senses receive a huge amount of stimulation, but the mind cannot process all of it deeply. Attention selects a limited portion of that input for active processing in short-term memory. In this sense, attention is a filter. It helps learners focus on what is relevant and ignore what is less important. When attention is focused, learning becomes more efficient because cognitive resources are directed toward meaningful material. When attention is divided or distracted, less information is processed well, and memory performance usually declines. This is why multitasking often harms learning, even when people feel productive. The mind may switch rapidly between tasks, but the quality of processing is reduced. In classroom learning, attention is influenced by interest, novelty, clarity, emotional state, and the learner's goals. If students do not attend to information, they are unlikely to remember it later, no matter how valuable the content is. So before we even discuss memory storage, we must recognize that attention is the doorway to learning. What enters that doorway has a chance to be processed. Short-term memory, or STM, is the stage where information is held temporarily while it is being actively processed. Unlike sensory memory, which stores raw input very briefly, STM contains information that has already been selected through attention. This is the information you are consciously aware of at a given moment, such as a phone number you are trying to remember for a few seconds, or a sentence you are mentally reviewing while reading. STM is not just a storage space, it is also a working area for mental activity. In STM, learners compare new information with prior knowledge, organize ideas, rehearse material, and prepare responses. However, STM is temporary. If information is not maintained through rehearsal or processed more deeply, it tends to fade quickly. This helps explain why people often forget information soon after hearing it if they do not actively engage with it. In learning, STM is essential because it is the stage where understanding begins to develop. New material must pass through this temporary system before it can become more stable knowledge. So, when students struggle to remember recently presented information, the problem may not be in long-term memory at all. An important feature of short-term memory is that it has limited capacity. This means only a small amount of information can be actively held and processed at one time. When too much information is presented at once, STM can become overloaded. As a result, learners may lose track of earlier information, misunderstand relationships between ideas, or fail to remember key points. This limitation is one reason why complex material can feel difficult, especially when it is unfamiliar. The mind is trying to hold several pieces of information at the same time, but its temporary processing space is restricted. Organization helps reduce this problem. When information is grouped into meaningful units, it becomes easier to manage in STM. Clear structure, logical sequencing, and meaningful connections all support better processing. This idea has major educational importance. Effective teaching often depends not only on what is taught, but also on how much is presented at once and how well it is organized. If learners are given too many disconnected details, STM may be overwhelmed before meaningful learning can occur. So, the limits of STM remind us that human learning depends on cognitive capacity. One important process in short-term memory is rehearsal. Rehearsal refers to mentally repeating or reviewing information in order to keep it active. For example, if you repeat a new phone number to yourself several times, you are using rehearsal to prevent it from fading from STM. At a basic level, rehearsal helps maintain information for a short period. This is useful when the information is needed immediately. However, rehearsal also plays a second role. It can increase the likelihood that information will be transferred from short-term memory into long-term memory. Repeated exposure and repeated mental activation make information more available for storage. Still, not all rehearsal is equally effective. Simple repetition may help for temporary retention, but stronger learning usually occurs when rehearsal is combined with understanding. When learners review material actively, connect it to meaning, and revisit it over time, memory becomes more durable. This is why studying by merely reading the same line again and again is often less effective than reviewing with attention and purpose. But stronger learning usually occurs when rehearsal is combined with understanding. When learners review material actively, connect it to meaning, and revisit it over time, memory becomes more durable. This is why studying by merely reading the same line again and again is often less effective than reviewing with attention and purpose. Rehearsal matters because STM is fragile. Without some form of active maintenance, information can disappear quickly. Long-term memory, or LTM, is the stage of memory responsible for durable storage. Unlike short-term memory, which is temporary and limited, long-term memory can retain information for very long periods. It includes facts, concepts, personal experiences, language, procedures, and many forms of learned knowledge and skill. In everyday life, long-term memory allows you to remember your name, recognize familiar people, use language, solve problems, and apply what you learned in previous classes. In the information processing model, LTM is the destination for information that has been encoded successfully. Once stored, information is not always immediately available in conscious awareness, but it can often be retrieved when needed. Retrieval is essential because stored knowledge is useful only when it can be accessed and applied. Long-term memory is central to education because real learning depends on more than temporary performance. A student may hold information in STM for a short quiz, but lasting understanding requires storage in LTM. This is where knowledge becomes stable enough to support future learning. New ideas are easier to learn when they can connect to information already stored in long-term memory. So LTM is not only a storage system. For information to enter long-term memory, it must be encoded. Encoding is the process of transforming information into a form that can be stored and later retrieved. This process is more effective when learners engage with meaning rather than only surface features. If a student repeats words without understanding them, memory may remain weak and temporary. If the student interprets the meaning, connects the idea to prior knowledge, and sees how it relates to other concepts, encoding becomes stronger. Meaningful encoding creates richer memory traces. These traces are easier to retrieve because they are linked to existing knowledge structures in long-term memory. This is why understanding is so important in learning. It is not enough to encounter information or even to repeat it. The learner must process it in a way that gives it significance. Prior knowledge also matters greatly. New information is remembered better when it can attach to something already known. In this sense, learning is cumulative. What you already know shapes what you can learn next. Encoding therefore sits at the center of effective memory formation. It is the bridge between temporary awareness in short-term memory and durable storage in long-term memory. Storing information in long-term memory is only part of the learning process. The other part is retrieval, which is the ability to bring stored information back into active use. Retrieval allows learners to answer questions, solve problems, make decisions, and connect past learning to new situations. In practical terms, memory is useful when it can be accessed at the right time. This means that forgetting is not always caused by complete loss of information. Sometimes the information is stored, but retrieval is weak or unsuccessful. The information processing model reminds us that learning involves both storage and access. When knowledge is retrieved, it often returns to active processing, where it can be used, reorganized, or connected with new material. This makes retrieval an important part of thinking itself, not just a test of memory. In education, successful learning is often visible through recall and application. A student shows learning not only by recognizing information, but by using it accurately in speech, writing, analysis, and problem solving. Retrieval therefore links memory to performance. It is the process that turns stored knowledge into action. The information processing model matters because it gives us a clear framework for understanding how learning happens. It shows that learning is not a single event. It is a sequence of cognitive processes that begins with sensory input and continues through attention, short-term processing, encoding, long-term storage, and retrieval. Each stage matters. If attention is weak, information may never reach short-term memory. If short-term processing is shallow, encoding may be poor. If encoding is weak, long-term retention will be limited. And if retrieval fails, stored knowledge may not be available when needed. This model also helps explain common learning problems. Forgetting may occur because information was never attended to, never rehearsed, never meaningfully encoded, or not successfully retrieved. At the same time, the model points to ways of improving learning. Rehearsal helps maintain information, and meaningful encoding helps create durable memory. These ideas are highly relevant in classrooms because they connect theory with actual learning behavior. Students learn more effectively when they focus attention, process information actively, and connect new material to what they already know. So cognitive psychology does not only describe the mind. Let us close by reviewing the main ideas from this lecture. Cognitive psychology studies internal mental processes such as thinking, memory, and decision-making. It helps us understand learning by viewing the mind as an information processing system. In this system, information first enters sensory memory, where it is held very briefly. Attention then selects some of that information for short-term memory, where it is actively processed. Through rehearsal and especially meaningful encoding, information can move into long-term memory, where it may be stored for extended periods. Retrieval then allows that stored knowledge to be brought back into use. These processes are essential for understanding both successful learning and forgetting. If attention is absent, learning is unlikely to begin. If information is not processed actively, it may not remain in short-term memory long enough to be encoded. If encoding is weak, long-term retention will be poor. And if retrieval is difficult, learners may struggle to use what they know. So the major lesson is that learning depends on a chain of connected mental events. By understanding this chain, we gain a clearer picture of how knowledge is formed, stored, and used. And that concludes my presentation. Please feel free to ask any questions. That's why practicing retrieval is so important.
Thank you. Do you have any idea who is the instructor of this course?
I'm here to help with any details you need. If you're looking for the instructor, I recommend checking the course materials or any official announcements from the institution. If you'd like, I can help guide you on where to find that information.
Do you know any latest announcements for this course?
Sure. The latest announcement for the course is that there's a joint lecture with Professor Dux tomorrow, April 2nd, at 2:30 p.m. in Hospital Hall 101. It's important not to miss it. Let me know if you'd like more details.
And can you tell me the email of the course instructor?
Of course. The email of the course instructor is benham.zahidnajad@neu.edu.tr. You can reach out to them directly if you have specific questions.
Anybody has a question for that? Sure.
Does short-term memory capacity differ from one person to another?
Good question. Yes, short-term memory capacity can vary slightly from person to person. Factors like age, cognitive abilities, and even practice can influence it. But generally, most people can hold about 7 items, give or take a couple.
Other than rehearsal, what can transfer information from short-term memory to long-term memory?
Great question. Another key factor is meaningful encoding, connecting new information to what you already know. Elaborative rehearsal, where you link concepts and create associations, can also help transfer information into long-term memory. And that way, it's not just repetition, but deeper understanding that sticks.
You mentioned before it's meaningful encoding, but can you suggest any ways of actually developing or doing meaningful encoding for the short-term memory?
Certainly. One effective way to strengthen retrieval from short-term memory is to practice self-testing. For example, after learning something, try to recall it without looking at your notes. Another method is spaced repetition, where you review the material at increasing intervals. Both techniques help transfer information into long-term memory over time. You're welcome. If you'd like more details or have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask. I'm here to help.
Do you like too much on AI? Can reduce our cognitive abilities?
I'm really glad you're enjoying the information. Remember, taking small steps and practicing regularly can really help with building that understanding. If you have any specific areas you'd like to dive deeper into, just let me know.
Relying on AI
I'm really glad to hear that you're interested. We can definitely work on some strategies together to help strengthen your memory and comprehension.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Let me know what you'd like to discuss or any questions you have.
The question is, can relying on AI reduce our ability in cognitive psychology?
That's an important question. Relying on AI tools can help us with tasks like organizing information or recalling facts, but it's important to still practice and engage with the material ourselves to strengthen our memory and understanding. Balancing the use of AI with active learning can help maintain cognitive skills.
Maybe you can give us some use cases that we can use AI to actually improve our skills in cognitive psychology.
Certainly, AI can be really helpful for improving in cognitive psychology by assisting with spaced repetition tools, creating flashcards, summarizing key concepts, and providing personalized quizzes. These techniques help reinforce memory and deepen understanding.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a research that I've made about this. And I gathered that we use a lot of time with our digital devices. It is harmful for us. How can manage our habits? Because as you know, we get a lot of information from YouTube, social platforms, in internet, and we use a lot of time in our daily routines. How can manage our habits to improve our knowledge and prevent our mental health?
I'm here to help clarify things. It's normal to feel overwhelmed at times, and it might help to break tasks into smaller steps. If you're looking for ways to improve memory or focus, we could explore practical techniques like spaced repetition or mindfulness. If you'd like, we can also talk about strategies to manage stress or workload. Let me know what you'd like to focus on.
But as you know, nowadays everybody uses social media and spend plenty of time on the phone. How can we prevent mental issues and also keep up with the technology and these modern platforms? Do you have any suggestions?
That's a really relevant topic. One suggestion is to set intentional boundaries for technology use, like scheduling regular breaks away from screens. Also, balancing online activities with offline hobbies or exercise can help maintain mental well-being. It's all about finding a balance that works for you. And if needed, talking to a professional might also help.
Yeah.
Does sleep have any significant role when it comes to cognitive function?
Absolutely. Sleep plays a vital role in cognitive functions. It helps with memory consolidation, problem solving, and overall mental clarity. Getting enough rest can significantly improve focus, learning, and decision making.
If I rely on AI on myself with the quizzes and the exercises, does this affect my memory or affect my ability of getting high grades?
It's understandable to wonder about that. Using AI to assist with quizzes can be helpful for learning patterns and reinforcing information. However, it's still important to actively engage with the material yourself. Balancing the use of AI with personal study and practice will help strengthen your memory and improve long-term retention, leading to better results overall.
This is slightly long question, but I have, for example, 6 courses, and given the required coding and study a lot, can you help me design an active recall practice so I can study it consistently and help memorize things in long-term memory?
Absolutely. We can break it down into manageable steps. Let's start by identifying key concepts from each course. Then we can create brief active recall questions. For example, after studying a topic, you can ask yourself, what are the main points? Or why is this important? Repeating this process daily and gradually spacing it out can strengthen your memory. Would you like to focus on a particular course first? Then we can tailor the practice more specifically.
What is your advice to the students to develop their mental health for the learning something in the long-term memory?
Great approach to start by breaking down the material into smaller chunks, focusing on understanding key concepts before moving on. Active recall, testing yourself regularly, and spaced repetition, reviewing the material over gradual intervals, can also be very helpful. And don't forget to take breaks and get enough rest, as that supports memory and learning.
Next, can you explain once more encoding and why it's important for improving and long-term memory?
Of course. Encoding is the process of transforming information into a format that can be stored in long-term memory. It's important because the more meaningfully we encode something, by connecting it to what we already know, the easier it is to retrieve later. This makes encoding a key step for long-term retention.
Any other question for Susan?
Can you give a sample question for the exam?
Let's imagine you are going to prepare a 3 questions quiz from this lecture, the lecture of today. Can you give us one example of what would be important to consider for a quiz, or give us a quiz question?
Sure. One important aspect to consider in a quiz is focusing on the core concepts from the lecture. For example, you could ask, what are the 3 main components of the information processing model? This helps check understanding of key ideas.
Yeah, the 3 key components.
That was a great demo actually for lecturer. Any question you would like to ask your instructor
Okay,
or question?
hopefully you don't get curious. Does AI truly think like human, or is this estimate calculation?
It's okay if you're still thinking it through. Take your time. If you'd like, we can explore more examples or break down what might be helpful for the quiz. Just let me know how you'd like to proceed.
Does you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. If there's anything specific you'd like to go over or any details you need help with, just let me know.
AI truly like human, or it just estimate calculation?
Of course, let's take it step by step. One thing that can help is breaking down the lecture material into smaller sections and focusing on understanding each key point. Then, you can create some questions to test yourself. Would you like to try forming a few examples together?
Okay, let me ask you. Is AI really thinking like a human or not?
Estimate.
That's a great question. AI doesn't think like humans. It processes information based on patterns and data, not emotions or personal experiences. It's designed to simulate certain aspects of human thought, but it's not the same as human thinking. That's an important distinction to keep in mind.
Any other questions?
No more questions? Okay. I think you are student as well. Okay, if no more questions, I think we reach to the end for this session. Again, with the academic research with us. Thank you very much for coming. I wish you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you will have another topic to discuss next week. So feel free to suggest more topics also if you have another topic to discuss next week. And until that time, stay well and stay. See you.